Congressman Tim Ryan is back at our table this morning, Democrat of Ohio, and you are an appropriator. That means you decide how money is spent in Washington.
And many others, but yes.
So how much money do you think ultimately will the two sides land on between $2.5 billion that the president would like to see and $8.5 billion that Senator Schumer has endorsed?
It looks like it's going to be somewhere between $6 and $8 billion is what the recommendations are really from the public health officials, which we need to follow in times like these. And I think what will make everybody comfortable if there's some clawback provisions where if the money isn't spent, the money can go back. I think in the short term that may be the deal that ends up being made. But I think it's going to end up somewhere between $6 and $8 billion.
What have you heard on a timeline? How will it get through Congress?
Well, you know, we only have a week or two left until we go on break, so we have to get something done. I hope next week. I mean, there needs to be a sense of urgency here. The key in situations like this is how do you get out ahead of things? And, you know, we've already kind of disinvested in public health over the last 10 or 20 years in this country. So, you know, I think this is, in these situations, there's always an opportunity, and hopefully the opportunity here is to remember why public health is so important, why it's important to have people on the ground all the time, why it's important to have a good public health infrastructure in communities all across the United States, whether you're talking about infant mortality or, you know, any other issue, addiction, all of these things. These are public health issues that we need to deal with, and hopefully this is a reminder to us how really important it is. So let's get that money out as soon as possible to deal with the immediate threat.
Has your district state been impacted yet by this coronavirus outbreak, whether it's the economy or having patients?
Well, not that we know of, but I'm sure there's a lot of people looking at their 401ks in the last few days. People getting close to retirement and seeing, you know, a couple thousand point plus drop with no real end in sight, because every day there's more news about something that brings it a little closer to home. There's not a lot of certainty coming from the White House. You're getting some mixed messages between the public health folks in the White House. So nothing that we can necessarily put our finger on just yet, but we've got to be prepared because all indications are is it's gonna spread.
What are you hearing from your constituents, manufacturers in your district?
Well, nothing just yet, but because most of this, the economic impact really has been felt really in the last few days when you see what's happening with manufacturing in China. And obviously, you know, coming from Northeast Ohio, we've been talking about losing manufacturing to China for 20, 25 years. And so it's no surprise to us that a virus in China is really going to affect the manufacturing supply chain. And then Northern Italy, which obviously is a manufacturing hub as well. So I think it's just a matter of time before we start to feel it. But all the analysts are saying this is coming down the pike, and you're seeing kind of the ripple effect happen. And so at some point, you know, it's going to hit home.
Want to get our viewers involved in the conversation? If you have a question or comment here for the Congressman, Republicans 202-748-8001, Democrats 202-748-8000, and Independents 202-748-8002. Remember, you can text us with your first name, city, and state as well. Back to the funding. The Speaker of the House, along with the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, have allocated how they want this money to be spent. They're requiring it must be new funding and not from other accounts. The president cannot transfer new funds to anything other than coronavirus. The vaccine must be affordable and available to all who need it. And they are also saying interest-free loans be available to small businesses impacted by outbreak. State and local governments reimburse for costs while assisting federal response. Are these realistic provisions to put into any money bill that gets passed?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's essential. You have, when you look at that list, you have the public health side, vaccinations, making sure they're affordable. You know, masks, for example, for healthcare workers who are on the front lines. We're totally underfunded with how many masks we have in our reserve bank. And so those things need to be funded. And then any business that's going to be impacted too. We don't want a business to take the hit. We should have some available resources for them to weather the storm. And I think that's an appropriate role for us. But what that really speaks to is what we just saw the president do with $3.8 billion in military construction projects that he basically stole to go build the wall, and, you know, completely went against what Congress did, the projects that were authorized. We've seen, whether it's in Europe, trying to push back on Russia, where there's 40 or 50 projects that are going to not get funded, they're going to get deferred. If you look in my district, we had money going to C-130Js, new airplanes for the Air Force Reserve. There were 4 that were funded. The president took $200 million, took half of that, so only 2 planes instead of 4. This is across the board. So what you saw Senator Schumer and Leader Pelosi do there was basically say, here's the money, it's got to go here, and you can't take it from anywhere else.
We'll go to calls. Robert, Portsmouth, Virginia, Democratic caller.
Good morning. I'm kind of worried. Well, the masks are for the infected, by the way. But would the president, would he use the coronavirus as a political thing, executive order, or the coronavirus is so bad, if he sees that he's going to lose, or take it like this, the coronavirus, how about during the elections? I mean, people getting together and, going up to vote and everything, wouldn't that help spread the virus if somebody was infected? He could use anything. You know what I'm saying? Executive order, you can't do this, you can't do that. You understand what I'm saying?
I think generally, yeah. I think this president has shown himself willing to do almost anything within the context of the budget or executive orders. But I would hope that we would have this thing well under control by November. I mean, we're hoping, optimistically, in the next month or two, we're able to get our arms around this. But we don't know because we've never seen this particular virus before. So, we're going to have to keep an eye on the president, as always.
Janet, Frostproof, Florida, Independent.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes.
Okay. I would like to know about medications because they were saying that a lot of the shortages that comes from China, I know a lot of medications come from China. I'm wondering if that's going to impact the way we get our medications and all of that.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. Over the last, 20 years or so, again, we didn't just lose manufacturing jobs to China. We also kind of outsourced our supply chain for pharmaceuticals, and I am on a bill now with Republican Congressman Posey from Florida to study that supply chain and to start fixing it. About 80% of our drugs and the different elements and parts of our drugs come from China, which is, you take a step back and you think, how did we let this happen? And so him and I, in a bipartisan way, are trying to fix this problem because in situations like this, relying on China and how they handled this. I mean, I think a lot of this, too, is a commentary on the system in China. It's dark. You can't see. They lie. They don't tell the truth. They weren't willing to get ahead of this. No matter what their spin is now, they tried to hide this. And when you don't have an open society where the government can be critiqued, where whistleblowers are appreciated for their strength and the knowledge that they can bring from underneath maybe a political conversation, you have a lot of problems. And what I hope happens here, Greta, is that, again, I spoke about a little bit of a wake-up call around public health. I hope this is a wake-up call around our economy and how much we have given to China around manufacturing. Why we need to have a defense industrial base, because we rely on China for a lot of the parts that come into supply our own military, dangerously reliant on them. You look at our pharmaceutical industry, dangerously reliant on China. Like, it's good to have trade, it's good to be engaged, it does have long-term benefits for everybody, it does prevent wars in a lot of ways because the economies are so linked. But you can't outsource your defense industrial base. You can't outsource your pharmaceutical industry for the sake of profits. And this is where our system has gotten too far tilted to, whatever the corporations want. They can write the trade agreements. The pharmaceutical industries can write the trade agreements that we have, whether it's the new NAFTA or, kind of what the most favored nation trade status with China or South Korea or whatever. It's been tilted to write these things for the corporations. And so the national interest, the public interest is set aside, workers, environment, and all the rest. So I hope that this really is a wake-up call for our country.
We'll go to Tom next, who's watching Royal Oak, Michigan, Democrat.
Yeah, I think Trump has done a terrible job on this. He's trying to minimize the situation, and he's not credible because he's lied in the past, and he discounts science, and he discourages whistleblowers. I think Trump should have technical experts leading this, not political hacks. And I hope Congress, and in particular the representative, will pass the funding resolution, but also attach a resolution saying Trump has to put technical people in charge or he doesn't get the funding. That's my call.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that. I do think that would probably be difficult to get through a Republican Senate, which has been the matter that we have been dealing with now for the last couple of years, is trying to initiate things that get stonewalled in the Senate. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. And when you look at, not to get overly political, but when you look at the fact-checking of the statements that the President of the United States has made over the last couple, 3 years, and the thousands of misleading statements that he's made. I don't want to say it's fine, but we're talking about Russian interference in our elections, and he doesn't tell the truth about that. We talk about other issues. He doesn't tell the truth about it. Not that that's fine, but when you get to a public health pandemic where you need transparency more than anything else, more than you need masks, more than you need anything, you need transparency. And just to see the press conference the other day where the president's saying one thing and the public health officials are saying something else, that is no way to run a railroad in a crisis situation like this. So I hope that the president rises to the occasion here, recognizes that this isn't theater, this isn't The Apprentice, this isn't a reality TV show. This is real life, and lives will hang in the balance if we don't do what's appropriate.
You also were asked today to talk about the 2020 presidential election. You being a candidate yourself, you are no longer. Who are you endorsing and why?
I'm with Joe Biden,
and why?
I'm very excited about it. I mean, again, I think this scenario here shows why you need steady leadership, why you need experience. It was Joe Biden's chief of staff that basically ran the Ebola situation for us here in the United States, Ron Klain, and he did a phenomenal job. So, that's one example of, Joe Biden understands what it means to govern. He understands a district like mine where we're trying to rebuild the manufacturing base, we're trying to get good paying jobs. And, I think he's going to be the guy. I think he's going to have a nice win in South Carolina. And then I think we're going to be off and running. And I'm really excited about it because I just think, I watch these videos of him interacting, and I've seen him do this, but watch him interacting with maybe kids who stutter or someone who lost someone to cancer. And his heart is just like right out for everybody to see. And I think that's what the country needs right now. Like, we need heart. Like, we have enough knowledge, we have enough data. We need our president to show some heart, and I think he's going to be able to cut through a lot of the noise with just who he is and his life story. He understands, like Jim Clyburn said, we know Joe, but Joe knows us, and I just think that's going to be the secret sauce here.
I know it's early, but if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, could you support him?
Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I mean, I think most of us are, set on supporting who the Democratic nominee is. I just think that President Trump has been such a violation of the major institutions in the country. I just disagree with him almost across the board. And I think we have to shore up our institutions, whether you're talking about the CIA, the FBI, trying to overrule judges, trying to consolidate power within the Justice Department. I mean, that's some scary stuff. And another 4-year term where the president doesn't have to worry about getting reelected, I think you're going to see a very unified Democratic Party.
How do you think Bernie Sanders plays in Youngstown, Ohio?
Well, I've said about Bernie, and I like Bernie, and I think that he has articulated the economic anxiety almost as well or better than anybody else. I mean, that's his thing. He understands the structural problems that we've had with the consolidation of power in corporate America and all the rest. I think his solutions are going to be difficult. I mean, you look at the natural gas industry, for example, in western PA and eastern Ohio. There's a natural gas cracker plant in eastern Ohio. there's about 6,000 or 7,000 union jobs there where people are making $100,000 to $120,000 a year. The payroll for this place is $10 million a day. There are people from Youngstown working in Western PA getting a really good rate in Pittsburgh. And to say we're going to get rid of natural gas, we're going to get rid of fracking, that's a very tough sell for people who are making 100, 120 grand a year. The idea that those same union members are going to be forced under his plan, forced into the public health Medicare for all plan, not an option, but forced. So now you're going to take their job and you're going to take their health care. And I think other things like decriminalizing the border and free health care for undocumented workers, where a lot of workers in America are really struggling to pay for their own health care. Those are going to be tough sells. And I think, I've been on the stage. I mean, in the one debate I was in, Bernie and I had a little dust up on this. And, I'm standing by my position. I like him. I think his heart's in the right place. I just don't agree with his solutions.
Back to calls. Dan in Youngstown, Ohio,
All
a
right.
Republican.
Uh-oh.
Yes, so I'm a former Democratic precinct committee person and a Democrat for most of my life. I voted for Trump. I'm calling on the Republican line. The Democrats seem to want to make everything a political adventure. Trump asked for $2.5 billion. Instead of saying, we want to give him $8 billion and put all kinds of restrictions on it, you could have given him the $2.5 billion right away. He could have started working on this. If he needed more, you could have given him another $2.5 billion. Instead, you turn it into a whole political thing. I'm tired of the dirty tricks of the Democrats. That's why I'm not voting Democratic anymore. You guys spent 2.5 years investigating the Russians. You couldn't find any collusion. You went on to the next thing. You talked about impeachment before he even took the oath of office. It's dirty tricks of the Democrats that are dragging this country down. You could work with the guy and you could help us avoid this coronavirus.
All right, Dan, let's get a response from the congressman.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Look, I work with President Trump where I think that he's doing something in the best interest of our community that you live in, that I live in. I don't live much too far away from where you live. On the new NAFTA that the president was pushing, I supported it. He's doing initiatives like being firmer on China with trade. I support that generally. I don't support the way necessarily he's always went about it. The Space Force and the defense bill, I've supported that. So I don't let my personal feelings for the president get in the way of me representing my constituents. But I will say that all of the intelligence community, has said that Russia has tried to interfere in our elections. And there were contacts between the president's campaign, Roger Stone, and some of these other members of the campaign who have been indicted and convicted. We can't not look at that. And you can't just say the president wants $2.5 billion and the Congress should just give it to him and not ask any questions. That's not how our government is set up. The people govern. Article 1 creates the Congress and the House of Representatives, and that's where funding bills start. So it may be inconvenient for some presidents. And I would just ask all of my Republican friends, like, would you have that same opinion if we were saying just give President Obama $2.5 billion and let him go out and do whatever he wants with it? No, that's not how our system works. So I understand the frustration if you're a Trump supporter, but the reality of it is many presidents find Congress to be a very inconvenient entity that they have to reconcile with, and that's the same thing here. But if we gave just one further step on this, we have to take care of this problem now. We can't go $2.5 billion and then hopefully, in a few weeks, because that just slows down the process. All the public health experts across the globe tell us you need to hit it quick and early, and that's what we're trying to do by getting that money to him. And the Republican Senate's going to have to pass it.
We'll go to Chicago next. James, a Democratic caller.
Yes, my question is, is it true that we receive 87% of our prescription drugs from China? And if it is true, why is this happening and when did it happen?
It's about 80% from the articles I read, whether it's different component parts of particular medicines. But this has happened over the last 10 or 20 years. And I think, again, it becomes a cost issue where businesses are trying to outsource a lot of their costs. It's no different than manufacturing. If you can get something made in a low-cost country, that they do that, and capital flows to those areas, which is why you have to have trade agreements that lift up these other countries with, the ability to organize and have a union, to have, some basic level of environmental standards that you need in a country. So you start leveling the playing field. We want to lift other countries up, but I think when it comes to things like defense industrial base and pharmaceuticals, like I can't think of two more important things to have in country for us to be able to rely on. And you look at component parts for 5G, we've gotten dangerously close to relying on the Chinese for those component parts for our 5G, which means they have an opportunity to steal a lot of information, to steal a lot of data from us that we don't want them to have. And this is a critical issue. And again, if I could just say, the idea that we're in this situation where the government is should take over things, or no government at all. That's been the conversation in this country for a long time. And the reality of it is what we're dealing with now is a symptom of that political conversation. And so we have to have a strong, nimble, smart government that's doing things right, like defense industrial base, like making sure that we have a supply chain for our prescription drugs, investments into science, technology, engineering, and math, research and development, infrastructure. We've got to be super focused in on what the role of government is, providing health care to people who can't afford it and all the rest. But being smart within those systems, and then appreciating the magic of the private sector that can help us solve problems, that the profit motive is an efficient thing, that it does lead to job growth. Who's going to come to Youngstown, Ohio and hire people? The government? No. We need to create an environment with the government and the local government and create an environment, but at the end of the day, some private sector entities got to come in and create the business. And it's got to be that balance. And if we don't have that balance, we get polarization and we get gridlock. And that's where we're at now.
Congressman Tim Ryan with us until the top of the hour when the House gavels in early today for their legislative session. Until then, more of your calls. Denise in Southfield, Michigan, Republican.
Thank you. I'm going to try and do this quickly because I'm watching the clock. California, with the one case of the coronavirus, it reminded me of Dr. Drew Pinsky. I haven't heard an update from him, but he's been displaying very enormous concern over the feces rats, the homeless, the lack of the governor addressing that and letting it continue, and that he said that something unheard of in this day can happen called typhus, and he's very concerned about it. And Nancy Pelosi, during the impeachment, that's all she cared about was impeaching Donald Trump. She should have acted on the coronavirus then. And Donald Trump was ridiculed by the Democrats for cutting off the travel from China immediately as soon as he heard about the coronavirus. And Mike Pence acknowledged this morning on TV that because he did that, meaning right now it's a whole lot less worse, it could have been a whole lot worse, that was very wise, and the experts are agreeing that Donald Trump is doing everything exactly that should be done with the coronavirus. Thank you.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. Obviously, California has a huge housing crisis, a huge homelessness crisis, which again is the lack of affordable low-income housing. I think it speaks to the economics of some of these big cities that the average workers are dealing with. I mean, you think okay, you talk about a working class person, you think Youngstown, Ohio, Flint, Michigan, but in a lot of these big cities, it's so expensive to live that people are now, losing their homes. And you have families living in these areas where they're literally dressed up like I am with, suits and ties and nice clothes, but they lost their house. So that needs to be addressed. And obviously there's a public health component to that, because when you have so many people that are homeless and nowhere to use the restroom or any of those things, becomes a real issue. But look, I don't want to overly politicize this. We want to work with the president, but he's got to work with Congress as well. He needs to be transparent and speak the truth. And we're going to be willing to work with them. This is beyond politics. We want to keep our people safe, and I'm willing to work with the president on this.
Congressman, lessons learned from running for president.
We should respect anybody who runs for president because of the grind, the time away from your family, the sacrifices that the candidate and their family makes throughout that whole process. So really a deep appreciation for all of these candidates who are running, and many of them have been running for a year and a half, 2 years. But it's campaigning. It's like people would say back in my district when I'd go home, to see my family, it'd be like, well, what's it like in Iowa or New Hampshire, South? I'm like, they're people. They're Americans who, have an opportunity to vote for the President of the United States, which is really pretty cool. And they have the same hopes and dreams and needs and worries and about their kids and the future and their economic situation and paying for prescription drugs that most Americans have. And so I think the candidates like a Joe Biden who really understand that, and you think about Obama and Bill Clinton and, even Trump to a certain extent, where people feel like they know him. There's a connection there. It's a really cool system. So a deeper appreciation for having the ability to partake in that. And again, it's a lot of work.
Will you do it again?
Probably not. Probably not.
Declaring here, you're not going to run again.
Probably. I mean, who knows what the world holds for you? But it's. I got a young family. Mason's 17, Bella's will be 16 next week. So we have a 3-week extravaganza for Bella, celebrating her 16th birthday, and Brady will be 6 in June. So that was the hardest part for me, is to really be on the road for an extended period of time. Just like, man. I miss my family. Can I get a bus and they can just all come with me? But they have their own lives as well. So I don't know if I'll do it again. I mean, I clearly want to have an impact in the world, and I think my ideas that I talked about during the campaign about having a chief manufacturing officer. Now all of a sudden you look at what's going on in China. It's like that's where my experience was coming from. I mean, using food as medicine to reverse chronic disease. Talking about social and emotional learning in the schools and mindfulness, meditation, and other contemplative practices to heal veterans who have post-traumatic stress. These are things I believe in, and I want to continue to push.
Well, if not the presidency, what higher office would you aim for?
Well, I'm moving up on the Appropriations Committee. I sit on the Defense Appropriations Committee. Pete Visklosky, who's the chair of that committee, is retiring next year. I'll be a vice chair of that committee, and that's the largest by far of the appropriations subcommittees. It's about $780 billion a year. We talk about defense industrial base. We talk about 3D printing and additive manufacturing, like all the technologies, and then some of the healthcare stuff that we've talked about. So I'm excited about that opportunity, and it's, I think it could be good for Northeast Ohio too.
Congressman Tim Ryan represents the 13th District in Ohio and member of the Appropriations Committee. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Greta.